In every century, there's war. In every century, people get married. In every century, people make a living. In every century, people are surprised that it still goes on the same way. We keep waiting for some radical transformation of the human condition. It is not going to come. We will still fight, we will still love, we will still eat. How we do that, that may change. But we must always focus on what is the permanent. In the 20th century, there was a great war. It began in 1914. It ended in 1945. It transformed the map of the world and transformed the Arab world in particular. It created borders that may not be there. It created cities that hadn't been there. It was a tremendous change in human history. It has now been 70 years since the end of that war. And we cannot understand this moment unless we understand the end of the war and what it gave us. At the end of the war, Europe faced a moral abyss. It had done something unthinkable between 1914 and 1945. 100 million people dead. 100 million people dead. And it confronted itself and asked the question, how could this be? How could we, the most civilized part of the world, have done this? They thought of themselves that way. And they drew two conclusions from the war. The first was that there had to be multinational organizations, that this war occurred because the League of Nations had failed, because at Munich we had been weak. It is because we hadn't stuck together. The second conclusion they drew is that the problem was nationalism, that somehow we must control nationalism before it destroys us. And for 70 years, the primary moral, political, economic project of the world has been to create a world in which the nation state cannot do what it did from 1914 to 1945. To create a world in which the nation state was brought under control. And many of the things we look at, NATO, the European Union, the various entities that came out of the Bretton Woods Agreement, like the IMF and the World Bank, these institutions worked. We know it worked because during that time there was no Great War. During that time there was relative prosperity. During that time, it was not a bad time to live. There are not very complicated measures about such matters. But the problem that it posed is that it challenged a fundamental moral principle that had been with us since the French Revolution, the right to national self-determination. And it challenged it in an interesting way. It created NATO, and it created the EU, and it created everything else. But it also created a class we'll call technocrats. A group of people whose right to rule derived from some sort of expertise. They were not elected. They were not answerable in many ways. In some ways they were. But throughout the EU, throughout NATO, throughout the various multinational entities that it created, there was this class of expert. And they were supposed to deliver us for our worst impulses. The problem with this class is there's only one justification for them. They work. They have no justification as representing anyone. They have no justification in terms of moral rights. the only justification for the technocrats is they do a good job. And the problem that happened began in 2 weeks, in 7 weeks, I should say, in 2008. On August 8th, Russia went to war with Georgia. And we suddenly discovered that all of the assumptions about what the world would look like, what geopolitics would look like after 1991, were false. Russia was back. It made war. And the entire international community did nothing to stop them, could not stop them. The second thing happened 7 weeks later. Lehman Brothers collapsed. And with this, we discovered that for all the technocrats who were overseeing the financial industry, for all the technocrats that were monitoring, for all of the financial engineers that were being produced by the Wharton School or for Harvard Business, they were trading things they didn't understand. In 1825, there was a great financial crash in Britain. It occurred because they were buying bonds from Latin American countries that didn't exist. But it didn't matter because they traded them back and forth and they were quite happy until one day they realized it wasn't there. This is what happened with Lehman Brothers. Everyone knew that the price of real estate could only go up, just as they knew that the third world debt crisis could not occur or anything else. And what came out of that crisis was this. The United States, on the whole, handled it fairly well. On a Sunday, the head of the Federal Reserve, Secretary of Treasury, the bankers went into a room, broke several laws, I'm sure, and came up with a solution that opened the banks the next day. No room was large enough to hold all the technocrats of Europe. 8 years after the collapse of Lehman Brothers, Europe still has not come to terms with a solution to the crisis. 8 years after the Russian attack on Georgia, the great multinational institutions still have not come to terms with what to do about Russia. But it was more than that, and it's really in Europe that we see this. That when it became important, the Germans didn't want to help the Greeks. The Greeks didn't want to pay back the Germans. Why? Because we're Germans. They're Greeks. And then the great fantasy broke. The idea that a European civilization was being born in which borders didn't matter. Suddenly it mattered very much whether you were Greek or Spanish, because in your country the unemployment rate was above 20%. Or if you were German, because in your country unemployment rates were well below 5%. Suddenly the statement, it doesn't matter, we are all Europeans, was falsified. And what happened in Europe, in a slow and unfolding process, was the emergence of nationalism out of self-defense. It had never gone away. The European Union had never figured out a way to actually abolish it. It was always there. But if you were a citizen of a nation, you understood something. The fate of Europe is not your fate. In other words, there is not a European outcome. There is a German outcome, there is a Greek outcome, there is a Danish outcome. It was not that people decided to become nationalists. It is that the reality was there were nations, and where you lived determined what you did. And the technocrats said, on the whole, we're doing okay. There's an old American story. If you put a man's head in the oven and the man's feet in ice, on average, he's doing okay. But unfortunately, not living very well. But it went deeper than that. Because it was not merely a difference between countries. It was within countries. The effect of 2008 was not the same for everyone. There was one effect for the technocrats, and now I'll use this name badly, to describe this entire class who manage things, from finance to governments, who did fairly well. And there were those who absorbed the 20% unemployment. And they saw Europe in a very different way, and they saw each other in a very different way. They saw Europe as usurping their future. If you're a Greek and you're 45 years old and you lose your job, you will never get another one like it. The devastation that was drawn in Europe was stunning. It was stunning because it was so unequally balanced, and it was stunning because the technocratic elite was oblivious to the price that was being paid by others. What does that leave you? The demand for the right for national self-determination. If you live in one of these countries and you realize that your generation has been destroyed, or your class in a generation has been destroyed, what is there left to you? Your nation. And what is your prime minister going to do? He's going to protect your nation. And what is the elite going to do? Attack the prime ministers who protect their nation. Viktor Orban of Hungary, who is disliked deeply by the aristocrats, technocrats, I should say, was faced with a situation that in the 1990s, mortgages were sold to Hungarians denominated in euros, yen, Swiss francs, everything. The forint, the Hungarian currency, went down. Orban went to the EU and said, look, we're going to pay you back in forints, and we're going to pay you back 60% on the dollar. Or we'll pay you nothing. Go home, think about it, let me know in the morning. Orban represented the Hungarian people. He was overwhelmingly elected, and the European Union tried to delegitimize him. Why? Both because he believed more in national self-determination than in the liberal ideology of the country, and because of the Europeans, and because he challenged the basic assumptions, which is that you may not protect your people at the expense of the European Union. But he did. It was a great moment in European history that will be remembered, for better or worse. What we now have, of course, is a tremendous division, not only in Europe, but in the United States and elsewhere, between those who have absorbed the price of national and international policies and those who have benefited. The level of hatred is profound. The anger is overwhelming. Any attempt to say, look, this had to happen, this anger, this rage, is rejected out of hand. But it's there. It is an empirical fact that we have to deal with. And in terms of thinking of the next 100 years, think of this. Think of a world which is more like the 19th century than like the 20th century. For 70 years, it was one way. And now it's going another way, and it will be the rest of the century. In the end, the French Revolution and the Enlightenment was right. In the end, there has to be a community that binds us together in language, in religion, in history, and this is our nation. And in the end, you must be allowed to control your fate in a democratic way. And in the end, your job is not to satisfy anyone else but yourself. This is not to say that trade will not take place. Of course a trade will take place. This does not mean that alliances will not take place. Of course they will take place. It does not mean that any of our basic relations will not take place, but they will not be hardwired. They will not be automatically part of the system. I think the United States will have a close relationship with the United Arab Emirates. It does not mean that it's eternal, it's permanent, or inviolable. We will have leaders who challenge the basic norms of the past 70 years for a very simple reason. What was true 70 years ago is no longer true. And the pain that trying to live that way is extreme. During the Brexit crisis, I remember many people saying, I don't know who these people are. I've never met the people who voted for Brexit. And therein lies the problem. There was a time when you would know people from different classes. It is very difficult to think of a time like this one, that there's so little interchange between the two. In the United States, those who hate Donald Trump don't know those who love him. I live in two countries, since I dislike him and don't hate him. And I travel between the two countries, and it is inappropriate to criticize him in one, or praise him in the other. And that means that there will be substantial internal instability in countries. I think it won't rip the countries apart, but it will be substantial instability. Certainly, countries will rise and countries will fall. The United States is 25% of the world's economy. $1 in 4 is produced by the United States. No matter how stupid we are, that is a fact. No matter how stupid we are, we control the oceans. No matter how stupid we are, we can send forces throughout the world. No matter how stupid we are, we can make mistakes because we have so much. Some countries will decline. We are seeing the second act of the collapse of the Soviet Union now. Russia, heavily dependent on oil, can't survive at this price. China is doing what Japan did, becoming a normal country, growing at a normal rate. But unlike China, it has 1 billion people living in extraordinary poverty. Germany derives 50% of its GDP from exports in a world in stagnation and recession. I don't know how you keep that up except by cutting prices, which they did. Countries will emerge. The great power of East Asia for me is Japan, the third largest economy, and those are actually true numbers, the third largest economy, a socially stable society, and a substantial navy. Turkey. When I said this 10 years ago that Turkey would be a great power, they laughed uncontrollably. Now the laughter is controlled. Russia faces Turkey as an equal. Turkey faces Russia as an equal and tries to decide what it will do and hopes that it will not have to do anything. But it will have to do something. And Poland, as Russia weakens and Germany weakens, take a look at the numbers. What is the fastest growing economy in Europe? Poland. So this is what remains the same. There will be rising powers, there will be declining powers, there will be powers that remain in place. They will be different. But what we have seen, I think, is the end of the myth of two things. The multilateral institutions will solve all of our problems. The second myth, that is, if you get somebody from Harvard to manage it. It's far more difficult than that. And the second myth is, do not look at the GDP. Look at how the GDP is distributed, because that will tell you what your future looks like. The world will not change. There'll be nations, there'll be wars, there'll be money, there'll be love, there'll be all these things. The names of the players will be different. They're changing before our eyes. But the thing to understand is that the period that began in 1945 is coming to an end. And 70 years is a very long time for any period. The idea that the solution is, let us all go back to what was, would be nice. But the price has been too high and the cost unsupportable. So what I would urge you to think about here in the Emirates, and you are in a unique position, and you have maintained, in many ways, your independence, your options, your rights, is how you manage this in the next 70 years. Because it is an enormously complex issue to be responsible for your sovereignty. It is far easier to give it to someone, very difficult to take it back. So let me end here, and let me urge you to consider that I mourn the past 70 years. It was a good time. But no matter how much I mourn it, it's done. Now we move on. Thank you.